All right, hello. We're gonna look at what happens when you have tables that are not matched and you're trying to enforce referential integrity when you relate those two tables. So we have a drain table, and we look at the design mode for this drain table, and let me get there. We see it's got a drain ID with a primary key and the volunteer ID as the foreign key. We look at the volunteer table and we see that the volunteer ID is the primary key. So that means that we're going to be matching the volunteer ID of the primary or the main drain table with the its foreign key that's the volunteer ID with the primary key of the volunteer table. And if you're going to enforce referential integrity, that means when they are referenced together, the data sets have to match. You can't have missing volunteer IDs or more than volunteer IDs in one table versus the other. Either less than or more, they have to equate. They have to have integrity. So in other words, whenever you have a drain, there has to be a volunteer. So what happens when we get that error? So let's actually look at that. And this will be the error that you get when we go to relationships and we add the drain and the volunteer table, and then we try to relate the volunteer ID to the volunteer ID of the other. And so we say volunteer ID from volunteer relate to drain, enforce integrity, create, and we get this error. It violates the referential integrity rules. So that means that there are unmatched records from one versus the other that you need to modify in some way. In this case, I would just either add or delete the records to get you moving along. But that's the problem, is that the records are not matching up. So what we want to do is we want to just, instead, you can do this a couple different ways. You can go back and redo the steps and figure out where you had problems with, getting your data sets for those tables. Or you can kind of do this, which is a find unmatched query between two tables. So we can go into database tools, create. We go to Query Wizard, and here's what we're going to select. We're going to say find unmatched query. So what we want to do is we want to find any of the volunteer IDs from the volunteer table that do not match with volunteer IDs in the drain table. So we're going to start with the volunteer table. So I'm going to say OK. Now this query, I'm going to say, hey, what records do I want to look for? And so I'm going to choose volunteer here. In the volunteer table, I'm going to be comparing it with the drain table. And what am I going to compare? I'm going to compare the volunteer ID with the volunteer ID. And so what you do is you make sure that you say, hey, the fields in volunteer, I want to see where it's unmatched with the fields in the drain. And then once you select the field that you're checking for unmatched records, then you click this little middle button. And what that'll do is it'll make sure that, hey, what are the unmatching fields that we have between these two tables. And then I'm going to click finish. And you see here that it brings up the unmatched records. So you know, hey, somewhere in these steps, something got messed up. You know, you could go in and add these records from one to the other. Uh, so you would look in both tables and see what's not matching up and then modify it to get you moving along. You know, a real world case, you would find the records that are missing somehow. In this case, either add some data there that you can just make up, or remove some of those. You know, delete those rows. You can right click on them and delete them, but you'll bring up your tables and then reference this and go in and make a change to get your ability to have referential integrity, because essentially your data is not matching up because most likely some step went screwy. And you know, it could you know, that's one reason why every time you do a case problem, make sure you save your file, back it up so that you can come back to it in case, like, say you did pretty good on case 2, so you save the case 2 file, make a copy of it before you start working on case 3. And then when you get done with case 3, save that file, back it up, make a copy of it for case 4, and so on. If you really want to dive into it, if you're still having problems, then I recommend going through the steps again and making sure that everything kind of, you know, sometimes and I just tell people to start over because there's some things that they've done incorrectly. Uh, and or, you know, they can come in and, you know, and work with me, of course. But this is how you would find your unmatched records so that you can do your relationship and enforce your integrity. All right. Bye-bye.